Hey there, my name's Margaret, and 2 years ago, I thought I knew what I was getting into. Mom was 82, starting to slow down but still independent. Dad had passed 5 years earlier. We'd had the talk about aging, the one where you discuss future care options, finances, all that practical stuff. I had a folder with her medical information, a list of her medications, and even her attorney's contact info. I thought I was prepared. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for the emotional roller coaster, the midnight phone calls, or the day I found myself arguing with my own mother about whether she'd taken her blood pressure medication while simultaneously texting my boss that I'd be late again. Today, I want to share what I wish someone had told me before I became my mother's caregiver. You know what's interesting about becoming your parent's caregiver? It rarely happens overnight. There's no ceremony, no official handoff of responsibility. Instead, it's a series of small moments that gradually shift the relationship. For me, it started with driving Mom to doctor's appointments. No big deal, right? Then I began managing her medications because she kept forgetting which pills she'd taken. Soon I was handling her bills because the numbers confused her. And before I knew it, I was calling her 3 times a day to make sure she'd eaten, taken her meds, and hadn't fallen. The thing nobody tells you is how subtle this transition can be. You don't wake up one morning and say, "Today I become a caregiver." Instead, you realize one day that your relationship has fundamentally changed. You've become the parent to your parent. What makes this particularly challenging is that many of us baby boomers are still working full-time jobs. We're not retired with endless hours to spare. We're balancing careers, sometimes our own children or grandchildren, and now our aging parents. It's like being part of what they call the sandwich generation, but with a full-time job on top of it all. I remember the first time Mom called me at work in a panic because she couldn't find her glasses, which were on top of her head. I stepped out of an important meeting to calm her down, and when I returned, my colleagues gave me that look, a mixture of sympathy and better you than me. That was the moment I realized this caregiving journey wasn't going to be a side gig. It was becoming a central part of my identity. Let's talk about emotions for a minute. Before I became Mom's caregiver, I thought the hardest part would be the logistics, the appointments, the medications, the paperwork. But I was wrong. The hardest part has been navigating the emotional landscape. There's this profound grief that comes with watching your once vibrant parent decline. My mom was a high school English teacher for 35 years. She read voraciously, did the New York Times crossword puzzle in pen, and could recite Shakespeare from memory. Now, she sometimes struggles to follow the plot of a 30-minute TV show. But here's what really caught me off guard: the guilt. The crushing, persistent guilt that follows you everywhere. Guilt when you're with your parent because you're thinking about all the work piling up at your job. Guilt when you're at work because you're worried about your parent being alone. Guilt when you take an hour for yourself because, well, how dare you take care of yourself when your parent needs you? And then there's the resentment. Yes, I said it. Resentment. It's the emotion no one wants to admit to, but it's real. There are days when I resent how my life has changed, when I cancel plans with friends for the 3rd time because Mom isn't feeling well, or when I realize I haven't had a real vacation in 2 years. The most complicated emotion, though. Love mixed with frustration. I love my mother deeply, but there are moments when her repetitive questions or her resistance to help drives me to the brink of my patience. And then I feel terrible for being frustrated, which brings us back to guilt. It's an emotional merry-go-round that nobody prepares you for. What I've learned is that these feelings, all of them, are normal. They don't make you a bad person or a bad caregiver. They make you human. And acknowledging them is the first step toward managing them. Here's something that really surprised me: how quickly old family dynamics resurface when caregiving enters the picture. My brother lives 3 states away, and while he calls mom regularly and visits a few times a year, the day-to-day responsibilities fall to me. And sometimes, I resent him for it. It's not that he doesn't care. He does. But there's this unspoken expectation that since I live closer, I'll handle everything. And it's amazing how quickly we fell back into our childhood roles. Me as the responsible one, him as the one who gets to swoop in, be the fun child, and leave before things get messy. We've had some tough conversations about sharing responsibilities. Sometimes those talks go well, and sometimes they end with one of us hanging up abruptly. We're still figuring it out. And it's not just siblings. Your own spouse and children feel the impact too. My husband has been incredibly supportive, but I know he misses our spontaneous weekend trips and the times when our conversations weren't dominated by mom's latest doctor visit or medication change. What I've learned about family dynamics is that honest communication is essential, even when it's uncomfortable. Having regular family meetings, even if some members have to join by video call, can help distribute responsibilities and prevent resentment from building. But here's the reality check. No matter how many family meetings you have, caregiving responsibilities are rarely distributed equally. And coming to terms with that fact is part of the journey. Before I became mom's caregiver, I had this naive belief that the healthcare system would be a partner in her care. I thought doctors would proactively communicate with each other, that insurance would cover what she needed, and that healthcare professionals would recognize the value of my involvement. I was, let's just say, optimistic. What I've discovered instead is a fragmented system that often treats caregivers as an afterthought rather than an essential part of the care team. I've sat in waiting rooms for hours only to have a doctor spend 10 minutes with mom and dismiss my concerns. I've argued with insurance companies about coverage for medications that mom desperately needs. I've had to become an advocate, a researcher, and sometimes, frankly, a pain in the neck to get mom the care she deserves. One particularly frustrating aspect is how medical privacy laws, while important, can create barriers. Despite being her caregiver and having medical power of attorney, I've had healthcare providers refuse to discuss mom's condition with me. I've learned to bring documentation to every appointment and to ask mom to explicitly tell each new doctor that they can share information with me. Then there's the challenge of coordinating between specialists. Mom sees a cardiologist, a neurologist, an endocrinologist, and her primary care physician. And guess who's responsible for making sure each doctor knows what the others are doing? That's right, me. I now keep a detailed medical journal that goes to every appointment. What I wish someone had told me is that being a caregiver means becoming a healthcare project manager. You need to document everything, question bills that don't look right, and sometimes be assertively persistent when advocating for your loved one's needs. Let's talk about money, because nobody else seems to want to. The financial impact of caregiving caught me completely off guard. First, there are the direct costs, the co-pays for doctor visits, the medications not fully covered by insurance, the grab bars for the bathroom, the special foods for her restricted diet, the emergency response system subscription. Then there are the indirect costs that hit your own finances. The reduced hours at work because you need a flexible schedule, the missed opportunities for advancement because you can't take on additional responsibilities, the depletion of your own savings when mom's funds run short. I've calculated that I spend about $7,000 a year on mom's care-related expenses that aren't covered by her insurance or savings. That's money that would otherwise go toward my own retirement. And I consider myself lucky. Many caregivers spend much more. What I wish I'd known earlier is the importance of exploring all available financial resources. It took me nearly a year to discover that mom qualified for a modest veteran's benefit because dad had served in the military. I didn't know to look into community grants for home modifications until after I'd already paid for them myself. And I wish someone had told me to have more detailed financial conversations with mom before caregiving began. We had discussed the basics, her savings, her income, her insurance. But we hadn't gotten into the nitty-gritty of what would happen if she needed more care than her resources could cover. My advice: have these financial conversations early and often. They're uncomfortable, yes, but far less uncomfortable than realizing too late that there's a significant shortfall in funds for necessary care. Make sure you take care of yourself too. Everyone says it, but when you're in the thick of caregiving, this advice can sound hollow, even impossible. How exactly am I supposed to take care of myself when there aren't enough hours in the day to take care of everything else? But here's what I've learned the hard way. Neglecting your own well-being doesn't make you a better caregiver. It makes you a depleted, resentful, less effective caregiver who's on the fast track to burnout. I hit my wall about a year into caregiving for mom. I'd been skipping my own doctor appointments, eating whatever was convenient rather than what was healthy, and giving up my morning walks because I needed to check on mom before work. I was exhausted, irritable, and starting to have health problems of my own. It was my doctor who finally gave me the wake-up call I needed. She said, if you don't start prioritizing your health, you'll become a patient instead of a caregiver. How would that help your mother? That question changed my perspective. I realized that self-care wasn't selfish. It was a necessary part of being able to continue caring for mom. So I started small. I asked a neighbor to check on mom 2 mornings a week so I could go back to my walks. I set up medication reminders on mom's phone so I didn't have to call 3 times a day. I found a support group for caregivers that meets once a month, and I make attending those meetings a priority. These small changes haven't eliminated the challenges of caregiving, but they've made them more manageable. And they've reminded me that I'm still a person with my own needs, not just an extension of my mother's care requirements. The truth is, self-care for caregivers isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for the person you're caring for is to take care of yourself. I've spent a lot of time talking about the challenges of caregiving, and they are real and significant. But I'd be remiss if I didn't also share the unexpected gifts that have come from this journey. Caregiving has given me a deeper relationship with my mother. Yes, our roles have changed, but in that change, we've found new ways to connect. Mom can't remember what she had for breakfast, but she can recall in vivid detail what it was like growing up during the Depression. I've heard stories about her childhood that she never shared before, understood parts of her life that shaped who she is, and gained insights into my own history that I might otherwise have missed. There's also been a profound sense of purpose in this role. On the hardest days, when I'm exhausted and frustrated, there's still the knowledge that what I'm doing matters deeply. I'm honoring the woman who raised me, who sacrificed for me, who has always loved me unconditionally. And I've discovered strengths in myself that I didn't know existed. I've become more assertive, more organized, more capable of handling crises without falling apart. I've learned that I can function on less sleep than I thought possible, that I can find humor in absurd situations, and that I'm far more resilient than I ever gave myself credit for. Perhaps most surprisingly, caregiving has taught me to live more fully in the present. When you witness the fragility of life up close, you gain a new appreciation for the moments of joy, connection, and even ordinary routine. I don't take good days for granted anymore, not Mom's good days and not my own. So yes, caregiving is hard. It's often thankless. It changes your life in ways you didn't anticipate. But amidst the challenges, there are these unexpected moments of grace, these gifts that you couldn't have received any other way. One of the most difficult balancing acts of caregiving is planning for a future you don't want to face while still living fully in the present. It's thinking about next steps in care while trying to maintain your parents' independence and dignity for as long as possible. When I first became Mom's caregiver, I was so focused on the immediate needs, the doctor's appointments, the medication management, the daily check-ins, that I avoided thinking about what would happen when she needed more care than I could provide at home. But avoiding these thoughts didn't make the future any less inevitable. It just meant I was unprepared. When crises arose, now I try to maintain what I call practical hope. I hope for the best, that Mom will remain relatively stable, that she'll continue to find joy in her daily life, that we'll have more good days than bad. But I plan pragmatically, researching assisted living facilities before we need them, understanding the requirements for Medicaid if her savings are depleted, having difficult conversations about end-of-life wishes while she can still participate in those discussions. These conversations and this planning aren't easy. They often leave me emotionally drained. But they're necessary, and in an odd way, they actually help me be more present with Mom now. When I know we have contingency plans in place, I worry less about the what-ifs and focus more on making today meaningful. I've also learned the importance of involving Mom in planning as much as possible. Even as her cognitive abilities have declined, she still has preferences, values, and wishes that deserve to be respected. Including her in decisions, even small ones, preserves her sense of agency and dignity. So my advice is this: don't wait for a crisis to think about next steps. Have the hard conversations early and often. Create contingency plans. But don't let planning for tomorrow rob you of the joys available today. One of the most isolating aspects of caregiving is the feeling that no one really understands what you're going through. Friends without caregiving responsibilities may be sympathetic, but can't truly grasp the daily reality. Family members who aren't directly involved might minimize your challenges or offer simplistic solutions. I spent the first year of caregiving feeling increasingly alone. Friends stopped inviting me to social events, because I so often canceled at the last minute. Colleagues at work were supportive but maintained a certain distance, as if my situation might somehow be contagious. Even my relationship with my husband was strained by the constant presence of caregiving in our lives. What changed this for me wasn't a grand gesture or a dramatic intervention. It was a casual comment from the pharmacist who regularly filled Mom's prescriptions. As I was picking up yet another medication, she asked how I was doing, not just as a polite greeting, but with genuine concern. When I gave my standard "I'm fine" response, she looked me in the eye and said, "You know, my mother had Alzheimer's. I was her caregiver for 7 years. It's the hardest thing I've ever done." That simple acknowledgement, that recognition of the challenges I was facing, nearly brought me to tears right there in the pharmacy. We ended up talking for almost half an hour, and before I left, she told me about a caregiver support group that met at a nearby church. I went to that group the following week, reluctant and skeptical. What I found was a room full of people who got it, who understood the frustrations, the guilt, the exhaustion, the occasional inappropriate laughter, all of it. I didn't have to explain or justify or minimize. I could just be honest. That support group has become an essential part of my caregiving journey. But it's not the only community I've found. There's the neighbor who checks on Mom when I need to work late. The fellow church member who sits with her during services so I can actually focus on the sermon. The online forums where caregivers share resources and vent frustrations at 3 a.m. when sleep won't come. What I've learned is that community exists if you're willing to be vulnerable enough to seek it out. And that community, that sense of being understood and supported, can make the difference between barely surviving as a caregiver and finding moments of genuine joy amidst the challenges. I want to end by sharing a specific moment that transformed how I approach caregiving, a conversation with Mom that I almost didn't have. About a year into our new caregiving reality, I was overwhelmed and resentful. I was doing everything I could for Mom, but it never seemed enough. The house wasn't as clean as she liked it. The meals weren't as varied as they used to be. The appointments were rushed. And underneath it all was this unspoken tension. I felt she didn't appreciate my efforts, and I suspect she felt I didn't respect her enough. One evening, after a particularly difficult day involving a missed appointment and an argument about her medication, I sat down at her kitchen table feeling defeated. I was about to launch into another explanation of why she needed to take her pills exactly as prescribed when something made me stop. Instead of talking, I asked a question I'd never really asked before. "Mom, what's the hardest part of all this for you?" There was a long silence. And then she started to cry. Not just a few tears, but deep, body-shaking sobs that seemed to come from somewhere primal. When she could finally speak, she said, "I'm afraid of being a burden. I raised you to have your own life, and now I'm taking it from you. And I'm afraid that by the time I die, you'll be relieved instead of sad." I was stunned. All this time, I'd been so focused on my own struggles as a caregiver that I hadn't fully considered what it was like for her to receive that care. To go from being the capable mother who bandaged my knees and helped with my homework to someone who needed help remembering to take her pills. To worry not just about her own declining health, but about the impact her needs were having on me. That conversation changed everything. Not in the sense that caregiving suddenly became easy. It didn't. But it shifted my perspective from seeing Mom as sometimes a difficult person to care for, to seeing her as my partner in navigating this challenging new territory. We started having more honest conversations about what we both needed. We found small ways to preserve her independence and dignity. We acknowledged the grief we both felt for the changes in our relationship, while also celebrating the new closeness we'd found. And perhaps most importantly, we started to laugh together again, at the absurdities of aging, at my clumsy attempts to help, at the memories we share that sometimes get mixed up but are precious nonetheless. This is the conversation I wish I'd had sooner, and it's the one I encourage every caregiver to have with their aging parent. What's this like for you? What are you afraid of? What do you need me to understand? Because at the heart of caregiving is not just the practical tasks of managing medications and appointments. It's about continuing to see and honor the person who needs care, their feelings, their fears, their dignity, and their humanity. So here we are. I started this by saying I thought I was prepared to be my mother's caregiver. I had the documents, the information, the practical arrangements. What I wasn't prepared for was the emotional journey, the way it would reshape my identity, my relationships, and my understanding of both my mother and myself. If you're a caregiver listening to this, I want you to know that you're not alone. The challenges you're facing are real. The mixed emotions you feel are normal. The work you're doing matters deeply, even on days when it feels thankless or impossible. And if you're not yet a caregiver but see it on your horizon, I hope sharing my experience helps you prepare, not just practically, but emotionally and relationally as well. Remember that the most important conversations often aren't about logistics or finances or medical care. They're about feelings, fears, hopes, and needs. Have those conversations early and often. They won't make caregiving easy, but they will make it more meaningful. If you found this helpful, please consider subscribing to our channel for more content on navigating the journey with aging parents. We cover everything from practical advice to emotional support for caregivers. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What's been your biggest surprise in caring for an aging parent? What conversations do you wish you'd had sooner? Your experiences might help someone else who's just beginning this journey. Thank you for listening to my story. Remember, in caregiving as in life, we're all just doing the best we can with what we have. And sometimes that's more than enough.